Cognitive tasks carry a metabolic price. We generally assume that the more complex the information, the more energy the brain must expend, requiring intense executive control and widespread neural firing to process the load. This makes the performance of memory athletes a biological outlier. These individuals can memorize thousands of random digits or the exact sequence of multiple shuffled decks of cards, datasets that exceed the typical limits of human recall. When researchers used fMRI to track the brains of these experts during their encoding process, they found a result that contradicted standard expectations of cognitive effort. Instead of surging with activity, the experts' brains showed a distinct drop in activation. Studies by Wagner and others revealed that during successful encoding, memory athletes use significantly less energy in their lateral prefrontal and retrosplenial regions than untrained novices. This lower neural footprint exists alongside drastically higher performance. The experts' recall volume outweighs the novices, even though their brain's heat map suggests a much cooler, quieter state of operation. This is the neural efficiency hypothesis. It suggests that elite performance doesn't come from flooding the brain with effort, but from utilizing specific, specialized circuits with high precision. High-level memory is not a result of raw computational power. It is achieved by systematically repurposing ancient evolutionary networks to bypass the brain's standard cognitive bottlenecks. To understand this efficiency, we have to look at the mechanics of encoding, how experts build structural mental models, and why spatial navigation is the biological foundation for all human recall. Optimizing memory requires viewing the brain as a highly adaptable biological engine rather than a fixed storage device. To study how memory is optimized, researchers first had to isolate the exact moment a thought becomes a permanent record. They needed to see which specific brain regions were responsible for successful encoding. This was achieved using the subsequent memory effect, or SME, a method linking brain activity during learning to the final outcome of a memory test. In an SME experiment, a subject views information while inside the scanner and is tested later. Researchers then sort the original scans into two bins, one for items the subject remembered and another for items they forgot. This process filters out the general noise of just doing the task. It reveals the neural activity that actually predicts success. Across these studies, the hippocampus consistently emerges as the primary node for successful encoding. Located in the medial temporal lobe, the hippocampus acts as the mandatory biological hardware for transforming episodic experiences and semantic facts into long-term storage. Lesion studies confirm that this region is a physiological requirement for memory, not just a correlational byproduct of brain activity. The most famous case is patient HM. After the removal of his hippocampus to treat epilepsy, he lost the ability to form any new declarative memories, living in a permanent present. However, he could still learn new physical skills and hold a brief conversation. This proved that memory is not a single entity, but a set of systems, with the hippocampus specifically handling the encoding of facts and events. Because declarative encoding relies on this localized hippocampal network, it is a discrete target. Understanding how this network functions allows us to use specific strategies to trigger it more effectively. Human cognition is limited by a biological bottleneck, working memory. This system can only hold a few pieces of information for a matter of seconds before they fade. When we see chess masters managing massive amounts of data in real time, it's tempting to assume they simply have a larger working memory capacity. Skilled memory theory shows this isn't the case. Experts have the same baseline limits as anyone else. They just don't store information as random, abstract pieces. They transform data into familiar, meaningful patterns. This is the long-term working memory model. For most people, new information piles up in a restrictive working memory box, quickly reaching its limit. For an expert, the data doesn't sit in that box. It flows through the bottleneck and immediately snaps into a pre-existing grid in their long-term memory. They aren't holding the data, they are indexing it. They use retrieval structures, organized systems of mental cues that allow them to access long-term storage as if it were an active workspace, without the constant effort of the prefrontal cortex. By using multimodal encoding, connecting an idea to visual, emotional, and spatial links, experts create multiple neural pathways to the same data point, making retrieval nearly certain. With practice, This process of pattern matching and indexing becomes so fast that it happens almost automatically. This explains the fMRI paradox. By offloading the work to these organized long-term structures, experts bypass the need for metabolically expensive executive control, allowing them to remember more while doing less neural work. Among all possible mental structures, one is uniquely effective at hacking the human brain: the mapping of information to physical space. The hippocampus evolved primarily for spatial navigation. Across the vertebrate world, this region's main job is helping organisms map and navigate their environments. Memory originally evolved as a survival tool. It wasn't meant to archive facts, but to store the locations of food, water, and danger, allowing an organism to use the past to predict future outcomes. This spatial network provides the context for what we call episodic memory. Because the brain uses spatial landmarks to organize past experiences, it can reassemble those same landmarks to simulate potential future events, a process essential for complex planning. The method of loci, or the memory palace, is a psychological technique that intentionally hijacks this evolutionary history. To remember abstract concepts, you place them along a familiar route. To encode the term encoding, you might imagine a security guard at your front door, scanning every person who enters. Moving into the hallway, you place consolidation, visualized as wet cement hardening on the floor. The spatial location acts as a permanent anchor for the concept. In the kitchen, you place retrieval, visualized as a chef pulling a specific recipe card from a drawer. You aren't memorizing words, you are memorizing a journey. This technique works because it forces arbitrary modern data into the brain's oldest and most reliable survival circuit. Spatial navigation networks are the biological scaffolding for all advanced human declarative memory and future planning. We can now resolve the initial paradox. A memory athlete can recall thousands of items with minimal brain activation because they aren't using brute force memorization. The low activation seen on fMRI is the direct result of skilled memory theory. They have replaced general cognitive effort with highly specific automated retrieval structures. By using the method of loci, they move the processing load away from the fragile working memory bottleneck and into the robust hippocampal navigation system. It shifts the task to the medial temporal lobe, where information is processed with extreme efficiency. This capability is not a genetic gift reserved for a few. It is a trainable physiological adaptation available to any healthy human brain. Our brains naturally resist disconnected facts, but they are built to remember information that is contextual, spatial, and meaningful. True memory optimization is an act of biological alignment, the process of formatting abstract information into the spatial language our brains evolved to understand.